Barton will introduce the panelists.
Thank you, Gail. Good evening, everyone. I have the pleasure of introducing the panelists as well as the moderator. Earley has professional election certifications at the state and national levels and is currently the treasurer of the Florida State Association of Supervisors of Elections and chair of the association's Cybersecurity Committee. Supervisor Mark Earley. Supervisor Wesley Wilcox, who serves as the Supervisor of Elections to our neighbor, Marion County, was elected in 2012, having worked at the office in various capacities, including Assistant Supervisor of Elections since 2001. Supervisor Wilcox is a graduate of the Election Center's Professional Education Program, earning the Certified Elections Registration Administrator, SARA designation. He was one of the first in the state to become a Master Florida Certified Elections Professional, a program sponsored by the Florida State Association of Supervisors of Elections. He currently serves as the secretary of the association. Supervisor Wilcox. And our moderator, Dr. Susan MacManus, is a distinguished university professor emerita in the University of South Florida's Department of Government and International Affairs. Known as Florida's most quoted political scientist, Dr. MacManus appeared on every major broadcast and cable television and radio network and has been interviewed by major newspapers in Florida, the U.S., and abroad. I present to you our panelists and our moderator.
Thank you very much. Thank you. And thank you for Florida for all of us that are political scientists. It's a great place to be a political scientist. I'm so happy that you're here tonight, and I really think that it's a very important program to put on. I think I'm bouncing a little bit, am I? And it's very important that people have confidence in the election system. Let me just read you a poll that was done recently by the National Public Radio Emeritus poll. Found that 1 in 3 Americans think that a foreign country will change midterm votes and results in the upcoming midterm elections. On the other hand, a majority of Americans, 53%, do think the U.S. is either very prepared or prepared to keep the midterm safe and secure, but 40% have doubts. And in another study that was done by the National Academies of Sciences, Engineering, and Medicine recently, one of the things that they did in this study was to identify some of the problems with election systems across the country. 3 things that they identified that we're going to start talking about. One is aging voting machines, and particularly electronic voting machines. Now, you have the good fortune this evening. Each of these gentlemen got to their position. They initially had an IT job. So they have ascended to the supervisor. You have very knowledgeable high techies up here. So, gentlemen, we're going to start, first of all, tell us about the status of machines in your county, and who your vendor is, how you go about picking them, what kind of standards you have to meet. And we'll just go down the line here, Paul.
Thank you, Dr. MacManus. One of the first things everybody needs to understand about Florida's voting equipment is that there is a very stringent certification process that all of our equipment must go through in order for us to be able to purchase it as county officials and use it. So we can't just go buy whatever the newest and greatest thing is. The vendors have to bring it to the state. They go through a very rigorous certification process modeled after the national certification that people talk about that is done through the Election Assistance Commission through their testing labs. But ours can actually be changed much easier and faster as the technology changes, because ours is based in administrative rule. So Florida's voting system standards are more adaptable to changing technologies versus what you see on the national level. And literally, like I said, everything must be certified before we can purchase it. So, and the certification process is not just a quick look at everything. I mean, it involves source code review. It involves a 10,000 mass ballot count test to make sure, and the error tolerance here is, you know, it's 1 in 1 million misread ovals is the standard. So if it misreads one oval out of more than one oval out of a million read, then it doesn't make certification and it cannot be purchased and used in Florida. So the equipment itself and the process that it goes through for us to purchase it is very, very stringent.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And the only thing I might disagree with is I would actually say that probably the EAC's process is somewhat modeled after Florida's, because we've been known nationwide as having one of the most comprehensive certification processes there are in the nation. And the source code review was something we've done here for a long time. That's done now at the national level. But it is good for Florida to have that more malleable and adaptable certification process and requirements, because we can respond somewhat more quickly. And that's, I think, to everyone's benefit.
And I'll add that 2 of us here at one point in time actually have completed through that certification process ourselves. We were involved in that. And I know my time doing it, that I could take a state certification out of the state of Florida, walk into a number of other states across the country, and they would take it as, if you're good enough in the state of Florida, you're good here. Several states were like that. Additionally, over 99.99% of the ballots cast in the state of Florida in this upcoming election, in this previous election, are cast on paper. We have paper ballots in the state of Florida. The number one recommendation out of all of the security scientists that come in and look at this stuff is to have paper ballots. I have a bachelor's in computer science. I want paper ballots, and I think my colleagues here are as well. Paper ballots is the bedrock. I think the item that gives us the most confidence in what we do. I can look at every ballot cast in Marion County for the last 22 months and show you that piece of paper. Today, tomorrow, and for the next 22 months.
Speaking of paper ballots, that is the number one recommendation of these commissions, is that you have paper ballots. And so along that line, we do have 2 exceptions of electronics in a way. One is for our disabled community. Can you talk about the equipment that's used for the disabled? It is an electronic voting machine, and a little bit about what's happening on that front. We'll start with you, Wesley.
Yes, Thank you. I actually looked at this information earlier today. I believe there are only 3 counties left in the state that have the electronic ADA compliant machinery. The rest of us are 100% paper. I'm a 100% paper county. Whether it be a visual voter or an ADA voter, we vote on paper. The 3 counties that are left, 2 of them are very, very small. I have a couple of precincts that have more people in them than those counties. But there is 1 large county that has that equipment left as well. But even that equipment, it still goes through the same valid and rigorous certification processes when they came into existence. So it is certified to do exactly what it was designed to do. And it does it very well in those 3 remaining counties. But the other 64 of us are 100% paper.
And I would chime in to say that of those 3 counties, that equipment that's called direct recording electronic, DREs, they don't have a paper basis. However, they're being phased out in 2020 also. So very soon, the 99.99% paper is going to be 100% paper in Florida.
Let me ask a little bit different question here. Many people don't realize that the bulk of the costs of running elections are borne at the county level, the county commissions, etc. Give us an idea about how much a single voting machine costs.
Well, most of our equipment, I would say, I mean, we represent the 2 different systems up here between the 3 of us, and I would say the average precinct for a single machine, you're in the neighborhood of about $5,000 plus or minus.
You're probably above that. I just
more.
purchased 10 to supplement some stuff out of that security grant. Mine are running about $6,000 a piece
up to 6.
for just an optical scan machine. That's not the ADA machine. That's just the optical scan.
Mine, I'm with a different vendor. Mine run about 7,200, but they have a blend. They have the ADA component and the optical scan built in, so it's kind of an all-in-one device that does both.
And how often do you change out equipment? And how do you test it to make sure you don't have malfunctions on election day?
Well, my equipment was just purchased going into the 2016 election, so my equipment is really quite new. In fact, people thought I was crazy trying to replace everything and get it done before 2016 in about 3 months. But as far as the testing that we do, the law requires that we go through a public logic and accuracy test, and that is just what we do for the public. The pre-testing that we do prior to the public LNA test is actually even more involved than what the public sees when they come for the public LNA. And the public LNA is just that. We're testing 2 things: the logic of the programming of the equipment. Will it reject a ballot if it's overvoted? Will it warn the voter if they have somehow marked the ballot by not filling in the ovals? And then, of course, the accuracy. When you put this pre-marked deck of ballots through, will it produce the results that we expect that it should produce? And we test all of the equipment in this public setting before each and every election. I can tell you the number of people who visit my logic and accuracy tests is somewhere smaller than the crowd out here, probably less than all of you if you left. That's about how many people come to my LNA
It's probably smaller than the crowd up here.
On the front desk area.
Right. Yeah. And let me add one thing to that. Our logic and accuracy test, it's defined in, I can't remember if it's statute or rule. It tells you what the percentage.
Statute.
It tells you what percentage of equipment you must publicly test. I know for a fact in Marion County, that percentage is about 10 machines. Before we ever get to a public display, a public test, 100% of every piece of equipment that goes out into the field is tested. We know the answer long before any question gets asked. So we have tested 100, actually we test more than 100 because we test everything we're going to use, plus all of our backup equipment goes through the same testing, and then a small subset of it gets tested in the public. So we already know how we're going to perform before we ever even get there.
Okay, I've got another security-related question about machinery. There's such a lot of problems these days with people breaking into places and whatever. How do you maintain the security of your election equipment before the election, during, and after? Start with you, Mark.
That's a very good question, and we are in the process right now of upgrading our security systems. We're in a new building, and we have card swipes at essentially every single door with different levels of access available to, depending on the security of that specific room, what's in it. Our voting systems and our voting machines, our computer systems that run the programming and the voting machines, those are at our highest level of security. And those require two-factor authentication to get in the door. Everything's under camera. We've got, in my 45,000 square foot facility, we've got about 75 to 80 cameras. We're getting new cameras too. So everything is under a microscope. This video is kept for weeks. I mean, actually months, not weeks. We've upgraded that capability with our new HAVA security money also. So we have a lot of security in place. It's very stringent, and we're always monitoring that to make sure that everything is as tight as possible.
Well, and I would just add, I have the good fortune, although I don't have the facility quite the size of Mark's, but all of my sensitive systems actually reside in an actual bank vault because I'm in an old building. So I have the big, heavy, gigantic bank door. So when people say, you know, so at the end of the day before we go home, anything with ballots on it, any memory sticks, anything that is not recoverable if it's lost, where voters would lose their vote, get locked in my bank vault. The building could burn down, the building could blow down in a hurricane. What's in my bank vault, one single poured piece of steel reinforced concrete, it's going to be there tomorrow. If someone wants to get into my systems, I think we will notice the giant hole they will have to blow in the wall to get in there. In addition to cameras and other things, not to mention password security.
All right, let's switch gears a little bit and talk about the security of a ballot that's been cast. And let's start, first of all, with vote by mail. Tell the audience here how you secure the integrity of the vote by mail. When you get the ballots, how do you make sure that employees don't talk about it or somehow the information gets out? We've had some incidents of that in Florida by accident. But tell the audience here, how do you protect the integrity and security of a ballot cast by mail? Wesley?
Yes, ma'am. First off, let me plug vote by mail. Our November general election is a 14-inch ballot, 3 columns front and back. It's going to take the average voter 30 to 35 minutes to read that ballot in a voting booth. If there are no available voting booths, you will stand in line until a booth becomes available. So it's not just how prepared you are, it's how prepared the 20 people that got there before you are, because you don't get in until they leave. That being said, a vote-by-mail ballot, that's my preferred method anyway. We're going to mail you that ballot. We actually begin mailing next Tuesday. We're going to put in the mail 40,000 ballots. Every one of them right now is printed, setting in the envelope with postage on it. The only reason I'm waiting for Tuesday is that's the law. Tuesday they drop in the mail. The following week I will start getting back 10,000 that following week. They come into my facility. Mark talked about his security. I'm in a 57,000 square foot facility. There are no blind spots in my facility. You cannot get inside my facility that we have not seen you on camera somewhere. I've got the mag strips. I've got the multi-layer multi-factor authentication. Each of the rooms that store this equipment, if you're not in that process, you cannot get into those rooms. So we use that. Also, up until canvassing begins, which begins 2 weeks before the election, the only thing that we know about these vote-by-mail ballots is that they have been returned. They've not been opened. And our process in Marion County is when we get to the opening process, we have a team of 2. One person sits at this chair, removes the content from that envelope, sets the content down, it's still folded, puts the envelope down. This person picks up said contents and flattens it out. I may have seen who the envelope was, but I didn't see what the contents was. He may have seen what the contents were, but he doesn't know who the envelope was. Plus, we rotate around so you're seeing all different types of precincts, all different types of demographics. Anybody that can count 40,000 ballots, that's what I'm going to get back. If you can look at 40,000 sheets of paper and remember what you saw, you're in the wrong spot. Vegas is looking for you, okay? So that's where I'm at.
Well, and just, oh, I'm sorry, go ahead, Mark.
Well, and to add to that, as ballots come in, there's very limited access to the rooms that these ballots are stored in. Every ballot is clocked in and time-stamped, and then it's put in a tray and very quickly taken into a very, very secure room. and we have everything under seal. There's chain of custody for every step of the way. And we couldn't really have too much tighter security because the secrecy and the surety of that ballot is our key goal. That paper ballot, that's the fundamental part of having secure elections. So we guard that to the utmost.
Well, and part of our canvass process involves accounting for each and every ballot to make sure that ballots don't go missing in the middle of that process, or that we find a surprise box of ballots that didn't get tabulated. That doesn't happen. Everything is done in publicly advertised meetings. We meet in a glassed-in room that is mic'd with speakers outside so that the public can come and see and hear everything that's going on. But we are forbidden by law from releasing any results. Even just talking about them anecdotally would be a violation of the law. So we can't even talk about our impressions of what we have seen as we are opening them, as it relates to how the election might be going without violating the law. And I've had it's tough corralling county commissioners and judges sometimes because they like to talk about stuff. But myself, my staff, and certainly because we do it in a public setting, that's part of the security. And again, in my jurisdiction, everything, all those ballots, all the votes, whether they're still sealed in envelopes or whether they've already been tabulated, are kept in that secure vault so that they can't be.
Let's talk a little bit about the tabulation process. At what point can you actually start running these ballots through the machines? Count.
That is the 15th day before the election is the first day we can open, and in addition to being able to open them, we're able to tabulate them by law.
All right, let's move now to convenience voting or in-person early voting, and talk a little bit here about the how the ballots at the end of the day are transported. There's an impression that a lot of these are electronically transported, and that's where hacking and intervention can occur. Mark, let's start with you on that one.
Okay, that sounds good. Actually, convenience voting or early voting started in Leon County. We started that in the mid-'90s. It's certainly taken off, and that's our preferred method because we like to have people vote in person. That way, if the machine has problems interpreting voter intent, it'll be rejected by the machine, and the voter can solve that right then and there. So that's our highest percentage of voting. It's typically in the mid 40% of our turnout is at the early voting sites. And as far as collecting the ballots, remember it's paper ballots. Each day those are collected out of the base of the machine. They are put in bags, transport bags, and secured with a very tight chain of custody. Two people sign for the ballots as they are stored, and as they are transported to our election office, and then the signatures are compared, and the seals are verified to make sure they haven't been broken, and then they are put in a secure area, just like our vote-by-mail ballots are. And we go a step further than that. Once we start tabulating ballots, the early voting ballots have already been run through voting machines and the vote-by-mail. We then start our audit process in line with our elections process. So we actually, in Leon County, retabulate every ballot through an improved audit system also. And what that does, that allows us to keep, like my colleagues have said, very, very good inventory of our ballots as the election is progressing.
Other comments about that?
Just one quick. Remember, each day at early voting, or when you go to early voting and you put your ballot in that tabulator, it's processed right then and there. The documentation that we bring back at the end of the day is the backup documentation in case we go into a recount, in case for our audit stuff. But your result, that processing has happened right then and there. So there's no transmission. Those machines are not connected to the internet. They don't have a network jack on them anywhere. They're not Wi-Fi enabled. It's like your toaster oven, and that's all it does. And it just processes those ballots, and then we take them back each day or into the process.
And I would just add one thing that we do in big elections where we know the turnout is going to be high. We actually change the memory devices daily. So when the paper ballots come back, the memory devices come back as well, so that because the processing of them, when there's tens of thousands of ballots on one device, it can take a long time for the system to process. So because those are uploaded directly into the tabulation system rather than done remotely, we want to expedite that process. And so oftentimes in the big general elections, we will change out those memory devices daily just to make the resulting the results reporting on election night more efficient.
A different kind of security. You know, we're having a very contentious election this year, right? Sometimes things get a little bit
Don't say.
get a little bit unruly at the polling location, and yet the right of a person to vote, the integrity of the vote, is very important. What kind of security systems do you have in place that protect the right of a citizen to cast a vote?
Well, I mean, every location has a bailiff who's charged with maintaining order. It's one of the required positions in the law for staffing a polling place or an early voting site. In my jurisdiction, we coordinate very closely with the law enforcement officials. They know where our polling places are, so that if there is an incident on election day, they have extra patrols that are in the immediate area. Now, law enforcement are not allowed to come in to a polling place unless they are there to respond to an emergency, or they have been summoned by the clerk, or they're there to vote. Those are the only three reasons that law enforcement can come. So they can't just come in, wave a badge and a gun around and say, I'm coming in your polling place, because they'll be breaking the law if they do that. So we do have extra heightened security, and in my jurisdiction, we train our bailiffs. The sheriff actually sends somebody to talk to them about things like walking around the facility, checking the security of the perimeter, looking for things that are out of place, smells, unattended packages, etc., just to make sure that they are on a more heightened awareness, particularly in the environment we find ourselves operating in.
We do very similar with law enforcement. They certainly know where our polling places are, and they do have added security, even a few days out. And also, some of those threats are not just necessarily someone being present and doing some kind of a physical attack, but it could be utilities and power supplies and things like that. So our utility company, the city of Tallahassee primarily, does know where our polling places are, and we meet with them in advance of elections just to have preparations in place for early voting, our office, and our polling places, that they can get a high level of response in case there is a problem.
One other group that we also contact, we do the things the other gentlemen here, is I've actually contacted the county road department as well as the municipal road department, because we had road construction in front of a polling place during the last election. So we told them, okay, Tuesday, November 6th, you got to do something else. And so that's one of the others that we do as well.
All right. Along another line here, many of you have, I think everyone has electronic poll books now, correct? What happens when power outages happen in the middle of an election? What is your backup system for your machines as well as your electronic poll books, which is how you check voters in?
Let me, if you don't mind, I'll start that. Marion County there was one other county that purchased electronic poll books at the same time that we did, but I believe we were the first to actually start using them in a live election back in 2007. We went full county-wide electronic poll books in the presidential preference of 2008. So we're over a decade using electronic poll books in Marion County. At that time, we purchased a number of portable electronic generators. Every one of my electronic poll books, we also supply with a UPS, just like a desktop UPS, a 650, whatever you want to call them, that'll power an EVIT or electronic poll book for about 45 minutes. Been using them now for over a decade. The UPSs have been used over the years. The generators that we purchased in the event of this, we've not actually yet deployed. We've got close one time. We were without power at one location for about 45 minutes. And then we did a town of Reddick election about a year ago where the whole entire city lost power for about 4 hours. So we can bring in UPSs and batteries and provide the electronic backup of those devices. They're low battery consumption devices. So it's not like we've got to move into something else. The machines themselves can handle that.
We have UPSs we have hundreds of UPSs, and we change our batteries every election cycle because periodically they degrade. So we have the exact same thing. They are very low power. But I think another important part of that, and we've seen this throughout the nation, is no matter how well you prepare, there's always a failure of some sort. So I believe we all have paper backups of our polling place registers, our precinct registers, our voter lists on site. The poll workers are well versed in how to use those, and they can roll those out at a moment's notice if all the electrical systems do go down.
And I would just add that, the tablets that these are based on, hands up, how many of you use a tablet? How long does it work before you have to recharge it, right? Usually 3 to 4 hours before your battery runs down. And these operate the same way. So, and in my jurisdiction, we also have a cooperative agreement with my county road department, who have tons of generators for all of the different things that they do. And we can have those brought in and with about an hour with about an hour's notice to any polling places, regardless, north or south in my county, where we would need emergency power.
The same report that I've referenced earlier by the National Academies of Science, Engineering, and Medicine, besides citing aging machines as a #1 problem, they also talk a bit about problems involving the shortage of poll workers, and other studies mention sometime the training of poll workers. We hear every election season of someone's complaining that a poll worker is looking at the ballot, etc. Please talk about how you are improving or protecting the privacy of the voter.
Well, I want to give you an interesting anecdotal story, because if a poll worker were to issue a voter a ballot and then immediately follow them to the voting booth and try looking over their shoulder while they were voting, they would scream bloody murder, and rightly so. But you let that voting machine kick that ballot out, they will hold it up and stick it in the poll worker's face and say, "What's wrong with my ballot? Why won't the machine take it?" But yes, that sort of privacy for voters is important. We all provide some form of secrecy sleeve for the ballot to be transported to and from the voting booth, and from the voting booth to the ballot box. And we do as best we can to try to make sure that the poll workers are sensitive to the fact that, the voters don't like you looking at their ballot, but yet you still have to have somebody right there in case there's a problem with the machine, with the voter's ballot, so that the problem can be adjudicated without compromising the voter's ballot as best as you can.
Dr. MacManus, I think we do face problems, though, getting poll workers. The election law environment is always changing. It's much more demanding, as well as the technology that these poll workers have to face. So that has become an issue. I think we were hoping to have around 830 poll workers in the primary election. We may do with 780. Now, we had some contingency built in, some flexible workers built in to cover any shortages, but it is becoming much more of a problem. And as far as privacy, as Paul said, we train our poll workers not to look at ballots, and we have them stand 2 feet away from the voting machine and that. But as soon as a ballot gets rejected, our poll workers are trained to tell the voter to put it in a privacy sleeve that Wes mentioned earlier. But invariably, they'll hold it up and say, "What's wrong with my ballot?" And our poll workers are trying not to look. But frequently, it's the voter who is really insisting that privacy is given up.
Okay, another question about some concerns that people have about how they can fix a problem that they encounter at the actual place where they're voting. And even the same would be true in a mail ballot. How do you adequately inform voters how they can ask for a new ballot if they make a mistake on the ballot that they've been given? Start with vote by mail. How's that done? And secondly, in person.
Well, let me cover vote by mail. So a vote by mail voter, that is probably the biggest challenge. And certainly because of my location and my large military population, most of my voters are sending their ballots from somewhere on the other side of the world. I have a lot of deployed Army, Special Forces, Air Force Special Operations folks that are scattered all across the globe. So in those instances, when a vote by mail voter, when we cannot get them a replacement ballot, because it's usually quite difficult for the mailing time involved, unless it's a vote by mail voter locally in the county that calls and says, "I made a mistake, can you send me another ballot?" Yeah, we can get another one in the mail to you tomorrow. That's usually not a problem, but for the actual remote voters, huge issue. Those ballots, they actually mark on them what their intent is, and then the canvassing board adjudicates. So, they fill in one oval, they cross it out, they say, "No, I don't want to vote for this guy," and then they fill in the other oval. Our canvassing board, in those public meetings, reviews those ballots that are being rejected by the machines, and we actually remake that ballot. Not only do we remake the ballot, we stamp a serial number on both the source ballot and the duplicate ballot. The other ballots, the bad ballots, if you will, get sealed in an envelope and held so that in the event of a manual recount, we actually by law have to pull those back out, marry them back up with those serial numbers, and make sure that there were no mistakes made transferring those votes from the original card to the duplicate card. That's a process we all do because it's written into the statute. And I'll let you guys talk about the other stuff.
Election day or early voting, all of our voting equipment in the state of Florida is required to alert a voter if they overvote, which is meaning vote for more than what you're allowed to, or if they blank vote, meaning they didn't mark any of them. So each equipment, regardless of vendor, do that in person at the time that the voter casts a ballot. So those two items allow that voter to take that ballot back to, they can accept it. Sometimes you get somebody that wants to vote for two candidates. It's their brother-in-law running against their next-door neighbor. They won't tell them both that they voted for them. But otherwise, they'll take them back and they can request a replacement ballot, go back into the voting booth, and then remark it and take it back to the tabulator.
And the actual ballot instructions say, if you make a mistake, please ask for another ballot. The instructions on the secrecy sleeves that we provide say the same thing. If you make a mistake, please ask the poll workers for another ballot. You're entitled to 3 in the state of Florida. So we always caution them after they've made a mistake the second time, okay, this is your 3rd and final ballot. I cannot give you by law another ballot if you mess this one up. So please be careful, or make sure if they brought someone with them maybe to assist them, that they have somebody assist them so that that 3rd ballot doesn't get spoiled.
All right, the next comment I'd like you to make or talk about is the fact that one other poll recently showed that around 40% of Americans, I've mentioned a little bit earlier, don't think that we have fair and open balloting or elections. And when asked what they're most worried about, there are 3 things that were asked about. One is fraud, the second is vote suppression, and the third is intervention by foreign countries. So let's talk a little bit about, in your jurisdiction, what are the things that you're doing, and what, when people mean fraud, what in your minds are they talking about? Then we'll get to the suppression, and then we'll get to the foreign governments. Let's start first with fraud.
To me, fraud primarily rears its head, most potentially, I guess, in the vote by mail. Getting invalid requests, or someone requesting on behalf of a different voter and having it mailed to an address that that voter is not residing at. Or potentially, if you're in campaigns or working within elections, you can get lists of voters who have requested an absentee ballot. And that information that can be requested is very comprehensive. And so targeting of voters who are receiving vote-by-mail ballots, either the elderly or people that may need assistance, we've heard of schemes and scams where people knock on the doors and try to volunteer assistance for people that have just received their vote-by-mail ballot, because the timing of that can be predicted based upon the data that we are required by law to give out the campaign. So to me, that's the key area of voter fraud. Now, you certainly hear of people trying to impersonate another voter at the polling place, but frankly, I think that the data is there that really just does not happen. That's a felony offense, and I have not heard of someone intentionally really doing that or seen any proof.
And I concur. I believe that's a myth as well. One of the other myths out there is we just don't randomly hand out vote-by-mail ballots. You just can't come into my office and say, oh, yeah, can you give me 10 of those? That's not what we do. A voter must make a request. We have a request on file. Someone will call me. I'm in a Kiwanis club. I had a gentleman the other day who said, you just sent me a vote-by-mail ballot for this August election. Why'd you do that? Got back to the office. I have a signed note from this guy. I sent him a picture, and he said, never mind. But you hear about it all the time. I think the vast majority of those type of things are just this everlasting myth that goes on.
Well, and the other side of the fraud, and what I would contend most people are probably concerned about when they think about voter fraud, is, are our ballots being counted correctly? And of course, as we have already noted, when we talk about the certification of the equipment, we're not just using stuff off the shelf from Staples. We go through the public logic and accuracy testing procedures using that certified equipment to ensure that it is counting those ballots correctly. before we even deploy all of that equipment to the field. We have a post-certification audit, and in Mark's jurisdiction, an even more comprehensive audit using their automated system, and that's all done in the public eye as well. We randomly select a race, we randomly select the precincts, and we actually count the physical pieces of paper again to ensure that those numbers are correct. In addition to that, we also we compare the people who have signed in using electronic poll books. Has made this really, really easy. We can look at how many people precinct X checked in. We can look at how many ballots were cast in precinct X, and by God, those numbers better match before we go home on election night too.
Explain what the canvassing board is. I think a lot of people are unaware of the role of the canvassing board and who comprises it. Canvassing
board is the board responsible in any jurisdiction for the overseeing the certification, the conduct and certification of the election. It consists of a county judge, a county commissioner, typically the chair of the county commission, or another commissioner who may be appointed in case somebody can't serve because they're on the ballot, and the supervisor of elections if they are not on the ballot. So those are the three members of the canvassing board. They're the only ones that are allowed to vote for whether we do or don't count ballots that have been questioned or for which there are problems. But those are the three people who comprise the canvassing board, and their job is all of those things that I mentioned: overseeing logic and accuracy testing, overseeing the opening of the ballots, the tabulation of the ballots, the certification of the results from those ballots.
All right. Another thing in terms of what some people hear about every election season is that somebody lives up north and they're registered there, and they live in Florida and they're registered here, and they end up voting in both places. How common is that, and what can be done about it? And is it illegal?
How common? You hear a multitude of stories like that, and I'm sure I'm not that naive. I know there's somebody out there doing that. I will tell you that same individual that's doing that, they're probably also claiming homestead exemption here in the state of Florida and in Minnesota or whatever else. Although none of the three of us here can cross county boundaries, the IRS, who collects their taxes, they can and they do. We get multiple telephone calls after an election from somebody saying, please remove my record from your rolls. The IRS has contacted me. But all of that being said, the state of Florida, our supervisors, our number one priority over the last few years was join a consortium of other states to share voter registration information. We were successful this past legislative cycle. We can join the ERIC consortium after January of 2019. And what that is that's a group of 26 states where we'll run all of our voter information against all the other states, and we will remove all of the duplicates. If I've got a voter and Georgia has that same voter, whoever has the most recent registration date will keep the voter. The other one will mail a notice to them saying, hey, you're being removed because we see you now in Florida. So it could happen, but I think the occurrence of that is going to greatly reduce over the next year to two.
And not only reduce, and of course there was a lot of anecdotal evidence from the 2000 election, which was very contentious. People who voted both in Palm Beach County and cast absentee ballots in New York or New Jersey, and even the people who were publicly identified in the press were not prosecuted. People that I have turned in for voting twice, my local prosecutor declines to prosecute. So until law enforcement does their job too, we can report when on the odd occasion that it does happen. And again, I'm not trying to indicate that it happens a lot. I think in my jurisdiction, I have turned over 3 people in the course of 15 years for voting twice or attempting to vote twice.
Vote suppression is a very big issue. You hear it mentioned a lot all across the country. And one of the issues about voter suppression that doesn't really affect Florida as much as other states is voter ID laws. And would you please explain to our attendees why Florida's voter ID laws are not as attacked as vote suppression as is true in some other states?
Sure, yeah, I think there's 2 key factors there. I think what makes the news usually for vote suppression and the introduction of ID laws, voter ID laws, is that they are brought into place right before an election. So and then you have pockets of voters who don't really have good opportunities to get the required ID. So Florida's voter ID laws have been in place for a long time, so that initialization of the new requirement but right before an election is not there. So that goes away. Also, I think Florida's voter ID laws are very lenient about what types of voter IDs can be used.
Run through the list if you would.
Well, there's 16 types.
Come on, name them all, Mark. One at a time.
Driver's license.
I would just point out that when Florida put its voter ID laws in place, we had 14 valid forms of ID. Over the years, that got whittled down to 9. We recently added some more to plus it back up to 12.
I think it's 16 now.
And then the one kicker thing on the tail end of all of this is what the other states mostly do not have is you can still cast a ballot with no ID. You can cast a provisional ballot. I think it was 17 of them cast in this August election for a voter that had no ID. They come in, they say, I forgot my ID. They can sign in. We're going to give them a provisional ballot. That ballot, they're going to sign the envelope. It's going to come back, and we're going to verify that signature. Once we've verified the signature, we open the envelope and count the ballot. The thing that most people don't realize, most of the provisional ballots that are cast in my county for no ID happen in my gated communities. Mm-hmm. The reason being, they're on their way to water aerobics that morning. They've got their swimsuit and their towel, but they do not have an ID. They drive past the polling place, say, oh, I need to vote. They walk in, oh, everybody knows me. I don't have an ID. You have to have an ID. So we do that, but most of them are in my gated communities.
Well, and in the states where there have been problems, notably Georgia and Texas, they put in so finite a number. It must be a Georgia driver's license or a Georgia-issued state ID. It was a huge problem for the state of Georgia. Alabama instituted voter ID laws right before the 2012 election. Did anyone hear about Alabama's voter ID problems? Do you know why? Because, again, like Florida, they said there are 7 valid forms of ID instead of just 1 or 2, and they equipped every elections office in Alabama with the ability to take a photo and issue a person an ID if they did not have one of the other forms of ID. So Alabama, again, if you implement it correctly and smartly and timely, most people don't have a problem with voter ID.
I think in Alabama they would actually even visit your home if you could not make it to the polls to do that.
Yes.
Okay, I want to take up another form of suppression that's often talked about, and that is the purging of registration rolls. And that's when you remove certain people, and then the controversy becomes, was that suppression? Please explain the purging process as it works in Florida.
Yeah, I will. First thing, purge is a harsh word. It really is. I do not use the term purge because in today's world of databases, very seldom, there's a couple of special cases, but very seldom does a record ever get completely removed. All remnants of said record. If you've got database stuff, your records are there basically forever. All that happens when we do some sort of list maintenance is an eligibility status changes. A person passes away, we don't go into our voter records and completely yank out every remnant of that record. We just mark that voter status as now being ineligible. So it's not those type of things. There have been Florida, and all three of us have been involved in that. There have been a couple of attempts over the few years, over the last 20 years, that were not as smart as they could have been. I think all three of us here, being data-type driven individuals, we push back on those type of things. There's got to be some logic that's coming on here, not a partisan divide, not whatever else. We talk about timing and those type of things. The list maintenance happens in odd-numbered years, not even-numbered years. So I don't think that you see as much of it as in some of the other states.
And I would just point out that it is a federal requirement, okay? When they created the National Voter Registration Act, it came with a double edge to that sword. One was, let's make voter registration accessible in as many places as possible, DMVs, libraries, post offices, wherever we can. Let's get people registered, and that's great. but it said if they have not voted in the last 2 general elections, let's send them a notice to say, hey, we haven't seen you in a while. Would you like to remain a registered voter? If you're still at your address because you haven't moved and not told us, which is usually the biggest culprit, by the way. So everybody out there, make sure you update your address to your elections office. But usually, so when they get that notice, they can check the box and say, yes, I still want to be a registered voter. They send it back to us. Great, no problem. You can continue not voting and we'll carry you for another 8 years. No problem. But if you don't return the notice, you get marked what we call inactive. While you are inactive status, you are still an eligible voter. So for an additional 2 general elections, you can stay on the voter rolls longer, and if you show up, if you ask for an absentee ballot, if you show up at a polling place, if you even just call the office to check on something, you are automatically reinstated and eligible to vote. So inactive voters are still eligible voters.
And I think you might have misspoke one point there. The notice that we send out, even if it doesn't get returned by the voter, as long as it's not returned by the post office showing that there was an address change or the NCOA process, that's really what initiates that inactive status. Okay, now the clock starts ticking. But you can actually just completely ignore that piece of mail. As long as it doesn't get returned to us by the post office as an invalid address for that voter, that is a proactive step that we can receive from a reliable outside source that, no, this voter does not live here anymore.
All right. The other thing that the National Academy study talked about is cyber threats. And, of course, as you know, Congress just gave Florida a lot of money to deal with this issue. Tell me what your counties are doing with this money, if you got any, and how, the second part of it, how much of a problem do you see the potential of cybersecurity threats in Florida this election cycle?
Well, cybersecurity is a very real threat, and it's something that each and every supervisor that I know takes very, very seriously, and it is a very important issue. We've been working with, every one of our conferences for the last 4 years, we've had at least one or more programs dedicated to talking about cybersecurity, to educating ourselves about cybersecurity threats, mitigation strategies, etc. The money itself could be applied in a lot of different categories. There, as you all probably read in the press, there was a little bit of contention about the money and our timelines for implementation and our timelines for use, which caused a little bit of a sticking point with a lot of folks. But remember that a lot of the things we are using this money for and putting in place are things that if we talk to you about, we are inherently making elections less secure. So if I tell you exactly what we're doing to secure the elections, then I'm giving you the key you need to get into my elections. So we don't typically talk about a lot of it in great detail, but I can tell you that a lot of people are using the money to virtualize servers to make the backups and redundancy of the systems much more improved. Mark mentioned adding security to his building. Very huge part of it, because if you can't secure the ballots that we're worried about, and if you can't secure the equipment that we're worried about, what good is securing the voter registration database system when it comes to that? So again, there's a lot of different things that the money can be used for, and a lot of people are taking advantage of it and using it for some very good things.
Yeah, and I would add that in general terms, mitigation strategies such as redundancy of systems, extended backup capabilities, so that if we have to start rebuilding the problems as they arise, we can go back further in time to help try and find the clean data that's out there, and then we have more robust recovery capabilities. There's a lot of money being geared towards training of our staff. One of the big concerns we have are phishing or spear phishing attempts, where you get an email that either has a link or an attachment or something along those lines, and then a staffer inadvertently clicks on something that looks like a valid email, but is not, and it can potentially deposit some malware that can really infect your networks. So the training is another big aspect.
One final point I would like to make that is all three of us recognize that this race that we're in is a race without a finish line. This is not something that we're going to solve today and we can go, oh, I'm good here. No, this is something we're going to do today. we did good yesterday. We're going to do better today, and we're going to do even better tomorrow as we move forward. Things will come up, and we will continue to race this race for this. This is our new reality.
And one of the things that makes our vigilance so vitally important in this is because we are a public-facing agency and access and transparency is an important part of everything that we do. I can't not open emails from you because you might have an actual legitimate need or question. But on the thing of spear phishing, I mean, it's really crazy. When Mark is our treasurer this year, the number of times he has called me and said, Paul, did you just email me an invoice to pay because you're the president of the association and I'm the treasurer? And the answer is no, that isn't how our association operates. But they see our information on a public website and they start sending him phishing emails trying to get him to click on links and to open things that happened when I was treasurer, probably happened when you were treasurer.
I was going to say it happened to me with Dana when she was president. Yes.
Okay, so I must work this in regarding what you're talking about. Another survey has found 3/4 of American adults feel that both Facebook, 62%, and Twitter, 57%, have done either not very much or nothing at all to make sure there's no interference from a foreign country this year. So you're talking about the whole social media problem, that some of it's external to what you can control, but yet you are responsible for the integrity of the election system. Have fun.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. Really, I think the chaos factor is really where we see the biggest threat through 16 and likely going forward into 18. I think there's been some great...
Let's do 18 and 22.
Well, yeah, and as Wesley said, going forward, that's going to be a continuing threat. I think some of the social media platforms are making good strides to try and tamp some of that down. But really, the polarization of our voting citizens is really one of the biggest threats and one of the biggest vulnerabilities that has expressed itself through social media in modern times. And that's really, our voters themselves have to take it upon themselves to help secure their voting system and our democracy by, looking at the bigger picture, discounting things, look for the real facts out there. Don't believe every single thing you read.
And I can only imagine what the First Amendment implications are for having social media sites tamp down things that we find objectionable. I know the fight's coming. It's already out there.
Right. So it's time for you all to be able to ask questions. I think you've really gotten a much better appreciation of the complexity of the job that these supervisors face. I say publicly they have the toughest job in politics this year and the highest expectations, because realistically, when you have people and you have equipment, they're not perfect. And yet everyone expects our elections to be perfect, and they really aren't. But it's really refreshing to see that you have public servants like here that are willing to share with you how all this works, and hopefully to give you more confidence in our election system this year. It's not going to be a repeat of 2000 election, I'm confident. In Florida, I'm confident of that. So who has a question?
We have all the
Come to
Chads
the microphone right here.
Don't be shy. You can't ask him who's going to win the governor's race, though, okay?
You can ask.
I can't answer.
Say your name and everything, sir.
I'm Professor Richard Newman. I've been a poll worker the last few elections here as well. And even though I'm a technically oriented guy, I teach in the Computer and Information Science and Engineering department and have studied these kinds of issues for a long time. I think one of the greatest threats that we have to democracy and to our election process is the confidence that our voters have in that process and in the accuracy of it and in the validity of it. And I'm going to ask a very non-technical question, which is, aside from events like this, what can we do to help our voters and our public have confidence in the voting process?
Well, one of our biggest challenges, and thank you for that comment, Professor, one of our biggest challenges truly is the rumor mill that is out there that moves faster than we can. And so as it relates to what we can do to improve voter confidence. So how many of you have seen the recent ACLU report about people who, the higher rejection rates for minorities and for young people, right? So how many of you
On
know
vote by mail ballots.
on vote by mail ballots? So how many of you know that the rejection rate information used in that report included ballots that were returned too late, and if you remove those from the equation, it totally changes the face of the report. But yet no one is talking about those changes to the data that would completely change the face of the report. And so we continue to hear about the fear of don't tell your kids not to vote by mail, because I saw a report from the ACLU that says, voting by mail, that they're just rejecting the ballots. And so we do not get a lot of help from the media when it comes to that. Sorry, well, Steve's not over there anymore. I was going to call him out. But we do not get a lot of help from the media when it comes to that, because when the story becomes a non-story, it leaves the media's attention, and we're left with the fallout from what people remember happened. But then when we come up with the answers for them, so really truly, contact your election officials if you see something that you think is wrong or that you don't understand. Contact us. That is what we are there for. We put all kinds of stuff on social media. We outreach at events all over the place. We're there in the public eye to answer questions candidly and frankly. And at the end of the day, what we still have to battle are forces outside of our control that are spreading bad information.
And I'll add one other piece to that is it's not just battling that. It's some apathy that's been going on, and if we've been out multiple events like this. We go out and speak to organizations all the time, all types of groups, all this time. If we knew what that magic bullet, golden egg, whatever it was to get people involved, we would have done it. I guarantee you, because it's not just today. It's not just the things that are happening today. Tell me what your turnout was in a 2009 municipal election. It's probably 9-12%.
I had one at 4.
Okay, 4%. One out of, at 10%, that's 1 out of 10 voters back a decade ago. So this is not a new challenge that we're facing. It's just a different way we're looking at it. I don't know what the answer is. I think it starts with education. It starts with families, and those type of things. Civic and community pride. Being involved in your community. I know I'm being naive or possibly, but it's what we work for, what we work toward.
I would just add the biggest safeguard is back to the paper ballots, though. I mean, the most intrinsic safeguard to our election security is having that paper trail and good security around that, and that's why we spend so much time focusing on that.
Ma'am, do you want to come to the mic, please? Thank you.
I would like to say I agree with education and that we should have civics in our schools. We used to, I remember 4th grade having, participation in the schoolroom of judging. Secondly, paper ballots I think are good, but somebody, a very wise person said, why don't we vote by computer if we could do financial, if we could do accounting by computer, we might also vote by computer. But my problem was during the election on Tower Road, there were 3 places to vote within 6 blocks. And those of us that got up at 4 o'clock in the morning could have done shift work with the others. Had there have been one, it would have been less expense, electric and stuff like that. So, and the people were wet and they were cold and they had children. There was traffic, and of course there's, they're carving up. So my question is, why were there 3 different places to vote within 6 blocks?
And I'm not the supervisor here in Alachua County, and Alachua County can answer their own questions. But I'll tell you about redistricting and what that is. You've got precincts. A multitude of precinct lines are not just on geography and distance from here to there. In between here and there could be a congressional line. I've got neighborhoods that one side of here is Congress 5, the other one 6. Whatever else. So you've got a multitude. You've got city district lines. You've got county commission lines. You've got school board lines. You've got turnout things in there. Redistricting and precinct lines are not just that cut and dry to where I can just, oh, I got 1,000 people here, I can stop.
So we have Hale Plantation on one side, and we have Gainesville on the other, and it's an obvious district game. In my, oh, forgive me. It's just
Well, but I don't mind approaching that problem. We all face similar problems. It's very similar to poll workers. Finding polling places can be very, very difficult. To find a facility that has the capacity, the parking, the power capabilities, the ADA accessibilities, sometimes those aren't equally spread throughout your communities. And it's been a very, very tough problem in many instances.
And getting
to find
harder,
good
by the
polling.
way, because
It is
schools and
just like
churches
getting
are
poll
kind of
workers.
off.
It's a difficult challenge. So I sympathize, all of our counties, I'm sure you could go find a few locations within our geography that have a very similar situation. And I sympathize with the voters to that degree too.
And I would just add that sometimes when that happens, it is a matter of, and every one of us who has done precinct consolidation have heard it in both ears from people who are upset and see that consolidation as, oh, you're just putting it all together to save money, and it's going to make longer lines, and it's going to do this. And in most of the cases, that's not true. But at the end of the day, sometimes that may be a facility. The law allows us to locate a polling place either within or in an immediately adjacent precinct. One of those precincts may belong to the next precinct over, and we had to cross the line to find a building that we could use for that other polling place, and they're not necessarily related. So there's a lot of moving parts behind how those decisions get made, but I would encourage you to talk to Ms. Kim up here, because she's the one that has the answer for that.
Well, thank you all. Oh, you have a question, sir? Yes.
Thank you for this really impressive presentation. Now, there's a very lengthy ballot, could take us like 30 minutes. So if someone is in line, do the polls stay open until everyone's voted?
Absolutely.
And anybody you must be in line at 7, though. The polls close at 7. Our clerks are going to close the polls. Anybody in line at 7 will be afforded the opportunity to cast that ballot, even if it takes them 45 minutes to read it. Yep. But you need to be in line by 7 p.m.
Okay, another quick question.
And that's all of us.
Another quick question. I don't think we've discussed it. We're expecting some very close contests here. What does it take for a recount? Explain the recount. First of all, the automatic recount, the first threshold, and then the second. Explain that process.
It's my least favorite R word. So recounts are triggered under statute when a race, when a person is elected or eliminated by less than half of 1%, triggers a machine recount, which means every ballot goes back through a tabulator. Again, it's all done in public. None of the stuff is done in super secret rooms in the back somewhere. It's all done in the public eye. All of the ballots go back through a tabulator. During that process, you outstack ballots in which the machine sees no marks or overvotes. And then if at the conclusion of the machine recount, you still have a margin of victory or defeat less than 1/4%, what happens?
Then you start manually tabulating. You start manually tabulating those outstacked ballots, because what you're looking for is missed voter intent. So if you get within that 1/4 percentage point margin after the machine recount, then all you look at by hand are the outstacked ballots that have potentially missed votes. And the reason we call them outstacked, that's more of a technical term for us. It was not processed and tabulated by the voting machine as a vote. So either there was no vote in that race, or potentially a marginal mark, or other reasons for outstacking is an overvote, or a completely blank ballot, which I guess was my first one. So that's when we get to the threshold of looking at by hand those outstacked ballots.
Hey, one more question.
Hey guys, my name's Justin. I just want to first thank you all for everything that you do to foster fair and accurate elections. You all do an amazing job. A quick question. During a couple of weeks ago, you had the district court that came out saying that you had to provide certain materials for election materials in Spanish. Also in 2016, you had the district court, same court, that ruled that your cure process for your absentee ballots had to be redone. All of this took place during the election cycle when you were busy with your election duties. So I just want to know, how do these judicial mandates in the middle of an election cycle affect your ability to carry out your job?
Let me talk about the second one first, because when the second one happened, the cure process that was in the law for blank certificates on vote-by-mail ballots was not mandatory. It was optional. So when the judge issued his order, he said, I'm ordering you to do exactly for the blank certificate, for the mismatched signatures, what you're doing for the blank certificates. So for counties where they were not doing any outreach for the blank certificates, they went, that was tough. I do nothing for the other ones either, and I'm treating them both the same. Now it's in the law that has changed. It is mandatory. The onus falls on us to do that. So we've had plenty of time to put that in place. As far as the other mandate goes, the judge was, in my opinion, and Mark and I were in the courtroom for this. In my opinion, the judge was very fair with providing injunctive relief in that case. Because he understands from a previous case that you might not have heard about earlier in August when they were trying to change how we laid out the primary election ballot in July. That one was a much bigger deal, I think, than the ballot being in Spanish, but it can be impactful. Most of us, one of the great things about being a supervisor of elections here in Florida is this is the hurricane state. So every single person here has learned to roll with the punches and to do what needs to be done to get stuff done. And that, unfortunately, when some of those legal decisions come down, is the way we have to deal with it.
But your point is very valid, however, I would say. Sometimes these decisions do come down the pike. Frankly, another important one was early voting on campus, which was not necessarily decided by the courts the way it was interpreted by the public and by students in particular. So trying to roll out, another example was that early voting on campus, trying to roll out these early voting sites with their very tight networking requirements, because the data there, the data connectivity back to our databases is very tight. So we have to secure that, find a room that we can use that has adequate capabilities, just like a polling site, for 14 days, and find poll workers who can dedicate their time for 14 days at a stretch is a tough ask. So everyone that's been impacted with those kind of decisions, Spanish language, early voting on campus, the cure, we managed to do it, but it can be very tough sometimes.
Along that line, there's a potential of at least 3 more amendments being tossed off by the Supreme Court. How much inquiry do you get from your public about the amendments?
Actually, one of my biggest questions, I think probably all of us are going to have to answer, is how come number 8 isn't on there? Because it jumps from 7 to number 9, and of course the court removed number 8, so we don't put it on there, and we're not allowed to renumber them, so people find that just a little confusing. I will be interested to see what we have to do if they remove more, because when a candidate gets removed from the ballot, we post notices to let people know, please don't waste your vote for candidate X because we're not counting ballots for that person. I'm not sure there's the same impetus behind we pulled a question that whether you vote in it or not, if it's been removed from the ballot and we're not tabulating, it's not a showstopper for your ballot one way or the other. So I'll be interested to see how that rolls. And
some of the remedy depends upon, or our actions depends upon the timeline that those decisions come down. If vote-by-mail ballots have already gone out, then there's not much we can do to notify those voters that there was a change.
Especially the overseas voters.
I was going to say, the vote and vote-by-mail, your ballot is set in Marion County. I put several hundred in the mail last week. I've got 40,000 in the envelope. We're done. The ballot looks like it will today, still on November 6th, regardless of what happens out of the Supreme Court.
I sent 4,000 to my overseas military, so those are definitely gone, long gone.
Yeah, so nothing's changing on the ballot itself. It's just a matter of whether we are tabulating and releasing results and how we have to notify the public about the changes.
That's the key point, releasing the results. We're tabulating. Regardless of what happens at this point in time, whatever amendments, all 12 that are left, we will tabulate the results.
Let's give the panelists a big hand, if you would. Thank you, gentlemen.
Thanks for coming out.
Thank you, Dr. MacManus.
And thank you, audience, for wanting to be informed, and I hope you enjoyed this presentation. Thank you very much.
And we'll thank Dr. MacManus as well for moderating.
Absolutely.
Thank you very much, Dr. MacManus.
Thank you.
Thank you.